The wine glass didn't break when my daughter-in-law set it down. It sang. A thin, vicious ring that made everyone at the table look at me as if I'd been the one to drop it. She didn't even raise her voice when she finished the sentence that started it all. She just turned her face, so the hallway light cut a hard line across her cheekbones and said it like a line from a policy document. You shouldn't be signing things anymore, Nora. You confuse numbers. It's better if Daniel handles your accounts from now on. The word confuse hung in the dining room like the smell of burnt garlic I'd covered with lemon slices. My son stared at his plate. Everyone waited for me to argue. I swallowed, because even at 69, even after burying a husband and paying off a mortgage letter by letter, I still have the reflex to keep dinners calm. I stacked plates. I stood. I nodded. And as I carried the soup bowls to the sink, I could feel Bianca, elegant, unruffled Bianca, watching the small tremor in my left hand as if it proved her point. You tell me, friend, what you would have said if you were standing in your own kitchen, in the apartment your husband tiled on his knees back when we could have bought something cheaper across the river, but he insisted on the harbor view because water is a promise. No, Rita. Would you have said what I wanted to say? That the numbers that built this family lived under my fingernails, grocery lists, contractor estimates, night school tuition for Daniel when he decided at 27 he wanted to be an architect after all? Would you have said I can still count? Or would you, like me, look down at the fine crack in the old ceramic sink and realize your fear is not that you'll be treated like a fool. It's that you will be made into one on paper. The conversation should have ended with coffee. Bianca always times her little reforms for dessert, when people feel generous and slow. But that night she had come armed. She slid a blue folder across the tablecloth as if it were a plate of pastries. Simple authorizations, she said. Nothing dramatic. You know how banks are with older clients. It's just so we can keep things flowing smoothly. Daniel finally looked up, his mouth a line I used to kiss when he was a boy who cried at football matches because he hated to see people collide. Mama, it's just practical, he said, not quite looking at the blue folder, not quite looking at me. We can review it all together. I didn't open the folder. I did what I always do when I feel my throat tighten. I asked if anyone wanted more salad, and when no one did, I carried the dishes into the kitchen and stood with my hands on the counter, breathing through my nose. The window above the sink shows the inner patio. Our building is a 1970s block in the port town of Sadira, the kind of place people dismiss as a rectangle of balconies. But if you stand in my kitchen at dusk, you can watch the neighbor across the way water her geraniums in a nightgown, and the retired fisherman upstairs turn on the radio at exactly 8. I stared at those familiar squares of other people's lives and thought of Chima, the concierge who has worked here since my Daniel was in primary school. Chima who knows which elevator button sticks in the winter and which pipes moan when the teenagers shower at midnight. Chima who once told me, lowering his voice as if gossip could change the weather, Senora Nora, the lawyer's mail comes registered now. I washed my hands though they were clean. I dried them slowly on the dish towel. When I returned to the table, I wore the expression women like me learn from years of school meetings and utility counters. Polite, porous, difficult to peg. I can read it tonight, I said, touching the blue cardboard with one finger. I'll take it to the notary tomorrow to make sure I understand. Bianca's smile didn't move her eyes. Of course, she said. We just want to help. If you had walked into that room right, then you might have thought we were a civilized family discussing logistics. But the air had changed. The small talk that followed about the new neighbor who parks too close to the bicycle rack, about Daniel's project redesign, about the cod I'd oversalted, had the stiffness of a play where the actors forgot the lines. When they left, Bianca kissed the air beside my cheek. Daniel hugged me without resting his weight. The blue folder stayed on the table like an unwanted gift. I listened to the lock click, to the hallway silence after their steps faded, and I sat down. The tremor in my left hand had stopped. That scared me more than the shaking. Calm can be a trap. It's not that I don't know how aging looks from the outside. My sister Rosa lives across town in a building with an elevator that shudders, and every week I visit her with oranges and aspirin and a list for her pharmacy app because her thumbs hurt in the mornings. I know how easy it is to let someone else fill in the forms. I also know this. The month after my husband died 3 years ago, when everything tasted like boiled rice and the apartment echoed, Daniel asked for a temporary power of attorney to help with the insurance claim. It was reasonable. He was grieving too. We signed papers at the notary on calle real while the clerk offered me water and called me Señora with a sympathy I could feel in my knees. After the claim settled, I asked Daniel to revoke the authorization. He said he would. I watched him put a reminder in his phone. And yet. Last winter, I received a polite letter from my bank asking me to confirm that my appointed representative had the correct updated contact information. I took the letter to the branch. The young teller with perfect eyeliner smiled and said, "It's all in order, Señora. Your son is still listed." I told Daniel over lunch. He brushed it off. "I must have missed the appointment to close it, Ma. I'll handle it." Maybe you think I should have pushed then. Maybe you're right. But grief is a fog, and Bianca was very good at staying charming. She repaired my curtain rods. She sent me links to exercise videos for women of a certain age with a winking emoji I decided not to find patronizing. She arranged for Daniel to take me to the cardiologist when I thought I felt palpitations. I mistook attention for affection, a lesson I should have learned by now. I didn't sleep that night. I put the blue folder in the bread drawer because thieves never look under flour, and I made tea. At 2 a.m, with the steam curling against the window, I opened the folder like a nurse changing a dressing. Inside, 3 documents. The first was titled Authorization for Account Management. The second, Consent for Digital Access. The third, Precautionary Health Directive. I am not afraid of documents. I worked 31 years as a municipal clerk where papers are the bones of city life. But these had a smell to them, perfume and print shop. Bianca's touches, paper-clipped tabs in pastel colors, a pen in the pocket with a gold nib. I read. The account authorization would allow Daniel to move funds in the ordinary course of life's expenses. The language so soothing you might miss the clause that defined ordinary to include property taxes, maintenance, utilities, and necessary improvements. The digital consent would give him access to my email, bank apps, even my health portal to streamline care. The health directive appointed Bianca, not Daniel, as the secondary decision-maker if I became incapacitated, receiving full authority to act in the family's best interest. There was a signature line for me, one for a notary stamp and one for witnesses. She'd left the witness lines blank and highlighted my signature block with a pale strip of color that made the space seem hungry for ink. I listened to the building sleep, the elevator cables settling, the distant murmur of the night bus on the avenue, and tried to name the feeling moving through my chest. It wasn't panic. It was recognition. This had been arriving for months in small packages. Bianca scheduling my dentist checkup without asking which day was good for me. Bianca changing my pharmacy to one near their place because parking is easier. Bianca telling the woman in the bakery that I shouldn't eat empanadas because of her sugar. I'd let it happen because it felt like someone putting a hand at my back on a staircase. Helpful. Steadying. Slowly pushing. In the morning I put on my good coat, the gray one with the hem I resewed last spring, and went to the notary. The notary is a woman named Anna who has seen every kind of family stage a silent war in her office. She greeted me with the cheerful briskness of a dentist who likes children but not their parents. I showed her the documents. She read quickly, the way professionals read, eyes like fingers. "Who prepared these?" she asked. "My daughter-in-law," I said. "She works in procurement for a private hospital." Anna nodded once. The nod said everything I needed to know about that combination of words. "You can sign versions of these that protect you," she said finally. "You don't have to say no to help. You can define help. We can limit amounts, require dual consent, specify the circumstances under which the health directive activates. We can name a third person to be notified whenever someone uses the authorization." People don't realize that elder care doesn't mean surrender. It means rules. "My son isn't a bad man," I said, and my throat surprised me by closing around the word bad like my mouth had tried to swallow it whole. "He's tired. He works too much. She's organized." Anna tapped the corner of the account authorization. Organized is a useful word. It covers so much ground. Do you want me to draft alternatives? We can schedule for next week. Bring Daniel if you want. Sometimes a neutral office brings out the best in people. Sometimes it brings out the truth. I agreed to a Thursday appointment and left feeling like I'd set a bucket to catch a leak. Outside, the air smelled of metal and fish from the morning trucks down at the port. I walked past the bakery where the girl with the winged eyeliner waved and held up a bag of yesterday's bread for me. It's our little agreement. She hates to throw it away, and on impulse I turned up Rue du Sol toward the building administration office. We have a part-time accountant now. The Homeowners Association voted last year to stop relying on Don Manuel's memory for everything, and in his place we hired Mikel, a young man with precise hair and a quiet, steady way of explaining spreadsheet lines to people who want to argue about courtyard tiles. I like quiet people. They have a way of noticing. Mikel looked up with relief when I walked in. Senora Nora, you might be the only person who reads the minutes. Come rescue me. He was half joking. We like to tease about the retirees who treat meetings like duels, but there was something else in his expression. He closed his laptop like someone hiding a surprise. Is everything well? He asked. As well as facts allow, I said. Listen, Mikel, this is awkward, but could I confirm that the association hasn't changed the name on our apartment's invoices? No changes, he said, pulling up the ledger. Still Alvarez Ugarte. Your husband's name is still there as co-owner because you never filed to update. It's normal. He looked at the screen, then at me. But I did send a duplicate copy of last quarter's maintenance bill to your son at his office because he requested it. He said he was helping you organize payments. Is that all right? I told him it was, smiled as if it was, and as I left he said, as if remembering the weather, oh, and the insurance policy renewal for the building came back with 3 units requesting certificates for mortgage banks. It's standard. Unit 4C, Unit 8A, and he held up a finger like a conductor raising a violin section, Unit 5B. Yours. Mortgage? I asked, too quickly, too sharply, and he looked up fast, apology already forming. No, not necessarily a mortgage, he said. Sometimes banks request certificates for lines of credit secured against property. Sometimes people switch insurers and the bank wants proof. I'm sure it's nothing. You know the feeling when a stair is an inch lower than you expect and your foot meets air before it meets wood? I walked home like that, as if I had missed a step I've taken for 30 years. I unlocked my door and went straight to the drawer where I keep the papers that make a life legible: deeds, tax receipts, envelopes with windows that show numbers. I found the building insurance certificate. I found my home policy. I found the property deed with my husband's tidy signature. I did not find anything that explained why a bank would need a certificate for my unit. Not unless. I called Daniel. He didn't pick up. I called Bianca. She picked up on the second ring, voice bright like a receptionist's. Nora, perfect timing. I was just about to call you. Did you have a chance to look at the papers? I told her I would talk to the notary on Thursday. I kept my voice level. Then I asked, casual as I could manage, whether they had used the apartment as security for a loan. Silence, the crisp, deliberate kind. Of course not, she said, and her laugh was the short, incredulous one she uses when a nurse suggests a generic medication. Why would we do that? Daniel has a salary, we're fine. I felt the lie slide into the room and sit down. Mikel mentioned a certificate request, I said. For our unit. The building insurance. That must be a mix-up, she said, and I heard a chair move, heard the soft thud of a door as if she'd gone somewhere more private. You know how these little offices are. Paper gets misfiled. Don't worry yourself. I wanted to say, Bianca, when you tell me not to worry myself, I worry less about the papers and more about your voice, but instead I said I would see them Sunday for lunch. I hung up. I picked up the phone again to call Chima and stopped. Chima is a good man, but he loves the theater of secrets. I needed a quieter listener. I texted Mikel. If a bank asked for a certificate for a unit, would the request show the bank's name? He responded quickly, usually yes. I can check the file if you like. And here, friend, comes the moment I still replay on the long nights. I hesitated not because I feared the answer, but because I feared what I would be if the answer confirmed my suspicion. Foolish? No. Something worse. Unnecessary. I wrote back, thank you. If it's not too much trouble. 5 minutes later my phone pinged. Bank, Lumina's Savings. I stared at the name. Lumina is Bianca's hospital's partner bank, the one that offers employee rates for family financial wellness. They'd sponsored the wellness fair where Bianca once convinced me to get my cholesterol checked by promising free roasted almonds at the exit. I made a sandwich and didn't taste it. Around 4, I put on shoes and walked down to the port. Old women talk faster by water. By the fish stalls I saw my neighbor Rocio, who knows everyone's birthdays and feuds, and I asked how her knee was. She showed me the bruise from the last injection like a seashell. Then she touched my sleeve and said, Lo, you know Bianca's friend in the radiology office, the one with the white teeth? I saw her at the cafe with that slick man from Lumina last week. She said they were organizing a workshop for women like us. She made the phrase sound like a dish you'd refuse. I smiled and told Rocio I'd bring her a jar of my quince paste. At home, I took the blue folder from the bread drawer and placed it on the dining table like a chessboard. My left hand trembled again, a ripple like wind in a curtain, and I welcomed it. It reminded me I was still moved by what moved me. I didn't call Daniel. I called Anna's office and left a message asking if we could move Thursday's appointment to tomorrow. I made tea with mint and sat at the table and opened the old tin where my husband used to keep spare screws and fuses. Under the screws I had hidden the sealed envelope he gave me the week he was diagnosed. Only if I'm gone and you feel cornered, he'd said then, pretending we were talking about an umbrella. I had never opened it. I held it now. I didn't open it. Not yet. I put it under the blue folder, as if the weight of his careful handwriting could counterbalance the pastel tabs. At 9, the intercom buzzed. It was Chima. Senora Nora, excuse me at this hour. Could I bring something up? I hesitated but buzzed him in. He came up with his cap in his hand like a boy, the brim pressed flat. I found this in the lobby, he said, holding out an envelope. It slipped from your son's portfolio last week when they were leaving. I put it aside to return and then, he made a face that stood in for forgotten and for shame. The envelope wasn't ours, it was from Lumina's Savings, addressed to Daniel. Through the little window I could see the words Home Equity Line of Credit, Disbursement Confirmation. Do you want me to? Chima began, and I took a breath that felt like the steepest part of the hill by the church. Thank you, Chima, I said. I'll make sure he gets it. He looked at me as if I'd said something other than what I said. People think the building doesn't hear, he murmured. But walls collect. He tapped his cap against his thigh, then took one step back toward the hallway and one step forward again, the way men do when they decide to risk gossip. And sometimes the elevator camera collects too. He nodded at the corner of my hallway where the tiny red light blinks. If you ever need to remember who carried what when, Senora, ask me. That night I couldn't find sleep, but I found stillness. I laid the Lumina letter beside the blue folder. I opened my husband's envelope and read 4 lines written in his careful hand, lines that made my scalp prickle and my mouth go dry and my fear turn from free-floating vapor into a shape I could touch. I folded the paper closed and slid it back into its nest of screws. I stood at the window and watched the reflection of our kitchen light in the black well of the patio. And when my phone buzzed at midnight with a message from an unknown number, if they push you, ask for the cameras on the 11th. I understood that I was not the only one who had been watching the play in my dining room. I turned off the kitchen light, let the darkness settle, and thought of the Thursday appointment I'd moved to tomorrow, of Anna's steady eyes, of Chima's quiet offer, of Michael's initial in that unsigned text. If I was going to be their burden, then I would be it on purpose, on paper, with witnesses. Let them call it care. Let me call it a lever. When I finally lay down, I did not pray to be spared. I prayed to remember everything exactly as it had happened. The next morning, I would walk into Anna's office with the blue folder, the disbursement letter, and my husband's 4 lines in my pocket. I would sit down, pick up a pen, and begin writing myself back into my own life. And then the doorbell rang at 8 a.m. Bianca at my threshold in her hospital blazer, holding a tray of pastries like a neighbor, smiling as if nothing had shifted, while behind her, just out of sight of the peephole, someone coughed softly. Bianca stood in my doorway in that sharp hospital blazer of hers, holding a tray covered with a linen napkin, and behind her the cough repeated. A man's throat clearing in the polite way people do when they have come to your home to sell you a fire extinguisher you did not ask for. She didn't wait for an invitation. She just leaned in with the practiced warmth of a neighbor who never needs to knock twice, her perfume arriving before her words. I brought the little sugar-free croissants you like, Nora. They only make them on Wednesdays, so I thought we could have a quick coffee before your errands. And this is Sergio. He's part of a community liaison program at the bank. He helps older clients with digital access. It will take a moment to check your app settings so things don't keep logging you out. Sergio stepped into view with a lanyard that announced his job before he did, his smile fixed in the shape of reassurance, his eyes already scanning the hallway like a technician looking for the Wi-Fi router. I did not open the door wider. I placed my palm on the edge of it so their two bodies had to adjust to the angle of my refusal. I appreciate the croissants, I said, and I let the tray pass through because food is not guilty of the hands that carry it, but I have an appointment this morning and I am not hosting consultations. Sergio's smile stayed, the way a screen continues to glow after you press the off button. It would be 5 minutes, Senora. Nothing changes without your consent. I only need your phone and the last 3 digits of your card to verify. I looked at Bianca and saw the impatience rise and soften in her mouth before she covered it with concern. Daniel asked me to help today, she said, softer, like a mother coaxing a child out of a bathroom stall. We can go together to your notary after, and this way the bank is already in the loop so they don't block anything. I wanted the moment to end without a scene, but I also wanted to not be rearranged like furniture. I will speak to the bank in the bank, I said, and I will speak to my notary in her office. The 5-minute trick is a good one. It assumes you don't notice what gets done in a small window when you are busy being agreeable. Sergio opened his hands as if showing me they were empty. I'll wait in the stairwell in case you change your mind, he said, and stepped back in that practiced way that allows a man to stay and leave at the same time. Bianca's smile returned to its polished setting. Then at least let me walk you, she said. The sidewalks are a mess with the works by the pharmacy, and I don't want you tripping. I thought of the white line painters marking our street last month, how they laid down a new border and called it improvement. I have walked on these sidewalks more years than you have known this building, I said. If I trip, I will take responsibility for it. We went down together anyway because fighting at the door is for people who enjoy an audience, and I don't. In the elevator, Bianca adjusted the napkin on the tray as if the croissants were children who needed smoothing. You know I'm not trying to control anything, she began, and I held up a finger because I knew the next sentence would be about love, and I didn't want to hear the word bent like that, not in a steel box with a mirror that shows you the years you wear on your neck. Save that line for the bank, I said. It plays better there. She inhaled in a way that sounded like a tiny victory for her lungs. I am trying to avoid problems while Daniel is swamped at work, she said. You don't see how his shoulders are lately. He wakes up and he's already filling a dam. I wanted to tell her that the image of my son's shoulders used like a tool annoyed me, but before I could respond, the elevator opened into the lobby and Chima, who was sweeping as if pushing thoughts under the sofa, glanced up. He greeted us and pretended not to notice the lanyard in the stairwell. Good morning, ladies. Watch your step at the door. The wind ate the mat in the night, he said, and the corner of his mouth shifted a moment when Bianca waved the tray at him and promised to bring him a croissant later. Sergio followed us into the street, keeping a distance that would allow him to claim he was not actually walking with us, while never quite leaving. The city had that morning smell of coffee and wet stone from the municipal hoses that wash away yesterday. By the corner, Rocio's voice rose from the tobacconist like a kettle. Nora, they changed the bus schedule again. Can you believe it? And who are these handsome helpers you're collecting? Do we all get some? And I smiled because it helped to have a witness who was not in on the script. Bianca kept her eyes on the uneven tiles, her smile wrapped tight. We're going to the notary to streamline things, she said to no one in particular and everyone on the street. It is such a relief when families organize themselves. Rocio nodded in that neighborly way that blesses and undoes in the same movement. Organization is good, she said, so long as the one organized is the one doing the organizing. At Anna's office, the receptionist lifted her eyebrows when she saw Bianca, because women like Anna's receptionist understand roles without needing names. Senora Alvarez, your notary will be 5 minutes. Please have a seat. Bianca chose 2 chairs as if assigning us places, but I stayed standing. When Anna came to the door and called my name, my body settled the way it does when someone uses your name with the right weight. I walked in. Bianca followed without waiting for an invitation. Anna greeted her but did not ask her to sit until she asked me with her eyes if I wanted Bianca present. I nodded because I wanted Bianca to hear the shape of the rules out loud. Anna put on her glasses and spread the documents like a dealer lays down cards. She lifted the account authorization, pointed to the sentence that defined ordinary course of life's expenses, and read it calmly. The clause is broad, she said. Broad means convenient for some and risky for others. It allows one person to decide what fits under a large umbrella. She then moved to the digital consent and tapped the part about email and health portals. You can delegate access without surrendering control. The law allows for 2 signatures for transfers beyond a set amount and for notifications to a third party whenever a change occurs. This third party can be neutral. Bianca shifted in her chair, sitting straighter, and crossed her legs the way people do when they feel they must hold their angle. We only want to make sure bills are paid, she said, and Anna nodded as if that was relevant but not decisive. Then we will write it so bills are paid and nothing else moves without consent, she said. Senora, do you want to proceed to revoke the old power of attorney your son holds and replace it with a limited authority requiring your countersignature for any transaction beyond, let us say, €300? And for any change in property titles or collateral, we will require a wet signature before a notary and written notice to an independent accountant named here. Yes, I said, and Bianca turned to me so quickly the air lifted the pages. Nora, that's extreme, she said, lowering her voice like a warning. Daniel will think you don't trust him. I did not raise mine. I am correcting a delay, I said. The bank letter they didn't intend me to see suggests I am late. Anna did not blink at that. She simply wrote with speed. We will also prepare a revocation notice to the bank, she said. You will deliver it in person and ask them to stamp a received copy. We will add you to the registry that sends you alerts when your deed is used as collateral. Bianca exhaled a laugh that would sound to strangers like softness, and to me sounded like a door being closed in a corridor. You're making everything complicated, she said. We live in the 21st century. There are easier ways. Anna glanced at her with the patience of someone reminding a child that gravity applies even to pretty balloons. The law is not an app, she said. When Anna asked if I wanted to name a third-party notifier, I said Michael's full name without turning to gauge Bianca's face, because I did not intend my pain to serve as anyone's entertainment. Bianca raised her eyebrows. The building's accountant, she said, as if I had suggested the postman adjudicate a birth. Why not name Daniel's colleague from his firm? At least he understands the kind of transactions we manage. Anna looked at me, waiting. Mikkel reads minutes, I said, and he answers calls. That is what I need. We set the notifications so that any wire above the threshold, any change to my account access, any request for a bank certificate regarding the unit or the policy would generate an email to me and to Mikkel. At the end, Anna slid the papers to me for signature, and we both watched my hand. The tremor did not interfere. I signed, and when she placed the stamp on the revocation notice, the clean sound it made against the paper felt like a life insurance paid up. We walked to Lumina's branch together because Bianca insisted that if I insisted on formality, then at least we should finish the chore in one morning, and in truth, I wanted her there to hear whatever words they had been saving for me. Sergio was waiting by the door like a cat who knows which window leads to the warm room. He greeted us with professional delight, a smile that confirmed he had been told to expect a scene and to absorb it. Inside, the advisor who calls me Senora with sing-song Spanish opened her mouth to greet me and shut it when she saw Bianca, because Bianca's hospital badge turns attention toward her like a magnet. I asked for a manager and placed the stamped revocation on the desk with a copy for their files, and when the manager arrived, she read the paper with eyes that counted in columns. "We will update by end of day," she said, and I said, "I would like the actual time of entry written on the receipt copy I keep," and she obliged, because some demands are small enough that refusal would look like guilt. Then I asked for a copy of any and all credit agreements where my property serves as collateral, and she looked at Bianca instead of me, a reflex I saw like a flicker. I waited. She turned to me again and asked for my ID, which I placed on the desk, and then she typed, and while she typed I listened to the clicking like an old train, counting unannounced stops. "There is a home equity line of credit from 6 months ago," she said finally. "It is in your name with your son as authorized user under the previously presented power of attorney. €5,000 have been disbursed in 2 tranches, and the last minimum due was not paid on time." Bianca's hand hovered over her bag, the gesture of someone about to produce a pill for a symptom they anticipated, and then didn't. "To which account were the disbursements made?" I asked. The manager read, "2 deposits into an account ending in 1632 registered to Alvarez and Company. Projects," and as she said the name of my son's company, the skin under my eyes tightened, not in surprise, but because words have weight when they are said in a room that smells of air conditioning and second thoughts. Bianca found her voice. "That is Daniel's company account for work expenses," she said. "There must have been an urgent supplier issue. He intended to repay in full. He mentioned paperwork delays at the tax office. It's all a timing problem." I did not ask her why urgency had chosen my apartment as its collateral. I asked the manager for a copy of the credit agreement and the payment history and the notice schedule. She hesitated and said copies could be requested by the authorized party, and I raised my palm and pointed to the revocation stamp and said, "I am the party, and I will wait for printouts even if they are summaries, and I will sign a request for full copies." We stood a long time while the printer made sounds like a stubborn door. Sergio tried to offer me a chair, and I remained standing because sitting would look like concession. When the papers arrived, they were blunt. "Ink does not soften because your family is sitting next to you." The repayment schedule showed entries and dates I remember for other reasons. The day I had my blood tests, the day Rocio's grandson passed his driving exam, the day I bought a new kettle because mine died after 20 years. I felt a tight heat at the base of my throat, but I did not let my fingers curl. I asked if there had been any notices sent to me regarding late payments, and the manager said they had been sent to the email listed, and I knew without being told that the digital consent Bianca wanted would have made those notices invisible to me. Bianca touched my elbow as if asking aloud, and I removed my arm because I wanted my skin to belong to my muscles. "We will fix this today," she said. "Daniel will transfer the amount due once he steps out of his meeting. There is no reason to escalate." The manager said that since the revocation was now active, the bank would require my authorization for any transfer from my accounts, and Bianca's throat moved at the word authorization like a swallow that hurts. Out on the sidewalk, Bianca started to speak in explanations, sentences that included the phrases, "You know we love you," "You know Daniel is under pressure," and I let them pass like fumes you do not choose to inhale. "I will see you on Sunday," I said. "I prefer to go home alone now." She nodded with a practiced sadness she keeps for families in the hospital waiting room when she has to tell them a surgeon is late. Sergio lifted his hands, as if to say that he understood the limits of his function. I walked toward the market, because performing normal tasks after a shock returns the air to your lungs. At the greengrocer, my card refused the transaction because the pending bank updates had frozen the profile to prevent simultaneous actions. That is what the young cashier said while she tried again and again, and the people behind me shifted and sighed. And in the small space of that line, the murmurs became a chorus that sounded like judgment even when it was only impatience. I paid cash from the envelope I keep in my bag for bus fares. I took the tomatoes and the 2 eggs, and I left with my jaw set the way you do when you know you are holding something fragile and nobody around you sees it. At home, there was a folded paper under my door. Chima's handwriting, 2 lines. "The camera in elevator be captured a scene Sunday late. If you need a copy, the maintenance vendor can pull it with a written request citing safety. Ask for Suso." I placed the note with the bank printouts and the notary copies, and I called Mikkel from the kitchen corner where the mobile signal is best. He answered on the second ring with that steady tone of his. "I have the notice alert set," he said before I could explain. "I saw the bank revocation timestamp." "Good." I hesitated because dragging a person into your family's pond requires you to look at them straight. "Can you check if the certificate request for the building's insurance came from a bank address or a personal email?" I asked. "I know it's extra, but it matters, and I will not ask again if it feels wrong." He was quiet long enough for me to think he was closing the door gently. "Give me 1 hour," he said. "And would you consider stopping by the association office before they close? I will be more comfortable giving you anything in person." I thanked him, and before I hung up he added in the tone you use when telling someone to put on a seatbelt before the car moves, "And, Nora, if anyone asks you to sign a gift agreement for the bare ownership of your apartment with you keeping the right to use it, do not today, not next week, not without me or your notary in the room." The word gift landed like a plate on a counter. I said I understood. Along the way to the HA office, I passed the notice board where someone had pinned a flyer about a workshop on eldercare finances sponsored by Lumina and the private hospital's Human Resources Department, with Bianca's name printed at the bottom as contact. The headline used the language of kindness to invite families to learn how to shoulder burdens together, and the image showed a smiling woman in a cardigan being helped into a chair she could have sat in by herself. I stood there longer than I needed to, reading the phone number twice, and I felt a flush of something like embarrassment, not because of the flyer, but because I have taught people to think of me as someone who will say yes to anything that is presented with clean fonts. A woman from the 3rd floor stopped next to me and followed my eyes. "Will you go, Nora? Everyone says these talks are helpful, and it would be nice to see you up front. You always have the questions we forget to ask." I smiled and said I was considering it, because sometimes the truth is a tool you keep in your pocket until there is a better table to set it on. In Michael's little office, he closed the door with the gentleness of someone who has learned that doors have memories. He opened a folder and took out a printed email thread with names blacked out with a marker that, in its imperfect ink, told me this was a line he was crossing, a small risk he was choosing to take because he believed I knew how to hold something without squeezing it. "I cannot give you the file on a flash drive," he said, "but I can show you what I saw, and I can give you this printed piece because it was sent to a public address by mistake before being resent from the bank domain." The top line showed the date, 3 weeks ago, and the sender was an email I recognized as Bianca's work address, writing to an assistant at the hospital with a copy to a person at Lumina, requesting the certificate of the building's insurance for Unit 5B to be sent to the bank's generic intake email, citing a bank internal reference. The language was brisk and confident. It did not ask, it told. Mikkel watched my face and decided to add the thing he had been carrying at the edge of his mouth. Her note said, "Let's expedite. The family member is being difficult." He did not cover the last word. I looked at the paper and counted 3 heartbeats before I said anything so that what I would say would be inside my control. "Thank you," I said. "This is enough." He exhaled as if he had been standing on one foot. "There is one more item you should know," he added. "Chima told me that on Sunday night they argued loudly in the elevator, and she said something about documentation in the blue folder. He says the camera is there and that the maintenance company can release a clip if a resident files a request citing safety or possible theft because objects were dropped." He paused to let me connect the blue folder to the night I had kept my breathing quiet while they left. "You will need to write that you believe an object of value might have fallen from a portfolio and that you fear someone picked it up," he said, "which is true because Chima turned something over to you, and although he did it to you directly, you can still say the lobby is unpredictable." I nodded because the truth does not need to be dramatic to be useful. By late afternoon I was tired but not defeated. I filled out the request to the elevator maintenance contractor. Suso at the service desk promised to pull the video from Sunday night and said it would take 2 days. And I thanked him, knowing gratitude to people who handle screws and wires has a way of being returned when you most need it. I stopped at the clinic to pick up my test results, and the nurse with the eyeliner, who always slips me an extra alcohol pad for my bag, told me without lowering her voice that Bianca had been in earlier asking whether my medical portal had any notes about Memory tests because she was helping coordinate a geriatric evaluation. The word evaluation made my stomach tense. What did you tell her? I asked. The nurse shrugged with a firmness that is a kind of resistance. I told her we don't discuss patients with relatives unless the patient authorizes it, she said, and I wrote a note on your file that anyone asking must have your signature. Good, I said, and the nurse leaned in and said a small sentence that made me want to take her hand. Don't let them push you into being fragile on paper to solve their organization problems. On my way home, my phone vibrated with a message from Daniel. Mama, can we talk tonight, around 8? I don't want you to think this is something it's not, and I stared at the words because they repeated the same pattern I had seen all day, people working to define what is happening with the vocabulary that best protects them. I wrote back that I would speak with him Sunday at lunch, in person, and that I had handled the bank authorization. He responded with a thumb that looked like surrender or exhaustion. I could not tell which, and I placed the phone face down on the table. That evening, my building's group chat lit up with a debate about the courtyard repainting. People sent photos with red circles around cracks, and one neighbor suggested we choose a cheerful color to lift moods, and Bianca wrote that gray is neutral and safe for aging eyes, and someone joked that at least the handrails would match. I read without typing because sometimes silence says you see more than they think. Around 9 there was a knock at my door and I opened to find Rosa, my sister, with a bag of oranges and her thick sweater pulled around her shoulders like a curtain. She looked at me and didn't start with pleasantries. I saw Bianca at the pharmacy, she said. She was telling the pharmacist about how you forget dosages and I know you don't, and I told her if I heard that again I would take my business to the other counter across the square. And you should know that the woman has a face for the world and another for the back room. I sat her at the table and made tea and told her the story in slices, the way I give her cake, not too big to swallow, and she listened with her hands around the hot mug like a person warming herself after coming in from rain. You will not let them make you a silhouette, she said, and her voice was flat. The way the voice is when she tells the butcher the cut he has handed her is not the one she asked for. Saturday, I decided to collect one more piece of paper for my folder because folders are not interesting until you bring them to a table and people try to dismiss them and fail. I went to the civil registry and got the simple copy of the property deed and a certificate of ownership with my name on it because holding a page with your name on it in the right font is a small belt around the middle of a case. On the way out, I saw on the public notice board a printed announcement for a presentation at Bianca's hospital next week about caretaking and legal tools, and the list of speakers included a lawyer from a firm I knew had represented banks in foreclosure actions. The thought sat in my chest like a book left open on a chair, not yet read, but unavoidable. At noon, my doorbell rang, and when I checked the peephole, a stranger stood there in a jacket with a postal badge. He handed me a registered letter that required a signature, and I signed with my slow hand so that he would not see it shake. I brought the letter to the table and did not open it immediately because opening letters fast teaches them they can scare you. I made coffee. I washed the 2 cups from Rosa's visit. I put out the napkin from the croissants and threw it away because it still smelled of someone else's plan. Then I opened the letter. Inside was a formal notice from Lumina Savings stating that the home equity line of credit secured by my property was 34 days past due, that previous electronic notices had gone unanswered, that the bank had scheduled an inspection to verify the condition of the collateral ahead of initiating protective steps, and that if payment of the overdue amount and fees was not received within 10 days, the bank reserved the right to begin a process that could include legal action to recover the sum and place a cautionary inscription on the property register. A paragraph in the middle indicated politely that a bank representative would visit the property on Tuesday morning between 9 and 12 to conduct the inspection, and that failing to gain access would be noted in the file. The letter used cool words, but every sentence performed a single job. They were coming into my home to prepare to take it. The last line had a name for contact and a telephone number that was not an app. I sat in my chair and held the paper until the edges warmed in my hands. Then my phone buzzed with a new message from Bianca. We need to accelerate the plan. The bank is sending someone to your place Tuesday. Please be reasonable on Sunday so we can sign the gift agreement for the bare ownership and resolve this cleanly. I placed the phone next to the letter and looked at them together as if they were two family members finally admitting their relation. I stood, went to the tin with the screws, and took out my husband's 4 lines again, and I read the sentence he had put there for a moment like this, the piece of advice that would make my next move both simple and hard. Then I folded the paper, put it away, and walked to the window to breathe, because in 2 days' time a stranger would be standing in my hallway with a clipboard, and I needed to decide what I wanted him to see. On Sunday, they would come for lunch as if nothing had happened, and this time I was not going to make cod. Sunday came with the kind of silence that doesn't mean peace, only the pause before things line up in rows. I rose early, cleaned the apartment in a way that was less about dust and more about order, because people who mean to measure you on your weakness should not find crumbs to feed on. I put away the blue folder, the bank papers, the notice from Lumina, and my husband's note in a drawer under the cutlery where nobody ever looks. Then I began preparing the table. Not cod, not empanadas, not the dishes Bianca expects. I made roast chicken with lemon and thyme, potatoes cut sharp, and a salad without dressing so nobody could say it was too salty, too oily, too careless. When Rosa came at 10 with her bag of oranges, she understood the weight of the day without asking. She took off her coat and started washing lettuce, as if she were part of a rehearsal. She looked at me over the bowl. "Do you want me to stay in the living room when they arrive?" she asked, "or would you rather I eat with you?" I told her to sit at the table because silence behind a door would feel like an audience, but her eyes at the table would be a witness. She nodded once and went back to washing. That is what sisters do when words are too small. They arrived just after noon, Daniel carrying a bottle of wine in the polite way, Bianca holding her bag and her phone as if both were instruments. Their coats smelled of their car, the expensive air freshener that makes everything feel slightly artificial. Daniel kissed my cheek, his lips cool, his eyes not quite meeting mine, and Bianca kissed the air with the kind of precision that comes from practice. "It smells wonderful," she said, looking around the apartment as if cataloging it. She placed her bag on a chair, close enough to reach without stretching. Rosa came out of the kitchen with the salad bowl and Daniel brightened for a moment, kissed her cheek with real warmth. "Tia, good to see you." Rosa smiled and sat, folding her sweater around her as if anchoring herself. I poured water into glasses. "We'll eat first," I said, "and we'll talk after." Bianca smiled again, a smile that said she would allow my order of things. The meal passed with the kind of strained politeness that makes every scrape of cutlery sound like an announcement. Daniel complimented the chicken, said he'd had a rough week at the office with a client demanding revisions that weren't in the contract. Bianca asked Rosa about her knee, told her about a new injection program at her hospital. I watched them talk, weighing which words were casual and which were bridges to what would come later. We ate. We cleared. Bianca offered to help with dishes and I said no. I stacked plates in the kitchen and returned to the table with the letter from Lumina, placing it in the center without flourish. "This came yesterday," I said. Daniel looked at it, his fork still in his hand, his jaw tightening. Bianca reached first, unfolded the letter, scanned it, then laid it flat again. "We were going to tell you today," she said, as if it had been on their schedule. "It's not as bad as it looks. It's a matter of timing. The bank overreacts. We just need your cooperation to close it cleanly." I looked at Daniel. "Did you use my apartment as collateral?" He exhaled, set down the fork, and rubbed his temple. "It was temporary, Mama. I meant to pay it off before any notices came. There was a supplier issue. We needed bridge funding. I thought it would be sorted by now." Bianca touched his arm as if to guide his words. "It is already under control," she said. "We have a solution. If you sign the gift agreement for bare ownership, we can restructure the credit in Daniel's name alone, and your right to live here is fully protected. It will calm the bank, and you won't have to worry." She pulled a folder from her bag, placed it on the table, opened it to the signature page. "It's very standard," she said. "Many families do this to simplify inheritance and taxes." Rosa leaned forward. "So she gives up the ownership now, and you keep the house safe by putting it in your names. And if she dies before you, you don't even need a will to inherit. That's convenient, isn't it?" Her voice was calm, her eyes steady. Daniel shifted, uncomfortable, but Bianca smiled that professional smile. The usufruct is guaranteed, she said. Your sister can live here until her last day. Nothing changes for her, and it prevents the bank from escalating. I looked at Daniel. Did you sign my name on the credit agreement? His eyes closed a second too long. The power of attorney was still active, he said. I thought it was still in place for things like this. I revoked it, I said. Weeks ago. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Bianca leaned in. That revocation hasn't fully propagated, she said. There are always delays in systems. The important thing is to adapt. The bank representative will come Tuesday, and we need to show them we are acting responsibly. If you resist, they will mark you as uncooperative, and then you really risk losing control. This way it stays in the family, nobody loses. Rosa laughed once, sharp. Nobody loses except the one who signs away her name, she said. Daniel pressed his palms to the table. Ma, listen, I didn't mean for this to get complicated. I thought I could handle it quietly, but now it's better if we simplify, if you trust me. You know I'd never throw you out. His voice cracked slightly, the boy still inside the man. I wanted to believe that boy, but the papers in front of me had no cracks. The bank already considers me past due, I said. They are coming Tuesday to inspect. If I sign this gift agreement now, they will see an elderly woman who just transferred her apartment to her son, and they will write in their file, vulnerable, no capacity to manage. And then the next document will not even ask me to sign. Bianca shook her head, smiling thinly. That's paranoia, she said. Nobody is out to harm you. This is a kindness, it keeps your life calm. I looked at her and saw for the first time how much she enjoyed the word calm when it came out of someone else's mouth. I will not sign today, I said. I will speak to the bank myself Tuesday. Daniel's shoulders slumped, his eyes dark. They won't listen to you, Ma, he said softly. They already think he stopped, but the word hung anyway. I let it hang. Bianca closed the folder with a deliberate snap, slid it back into her bag, and stood. Then you leave us no choice, she said. We tried to protect you, we offered a path, and you reject it. Do not blame us when consequences follow. She kissed the air again, colder this time, and went to the door. Daniel lingered, eyes on the table, then followed. Rosa and I sat in the silence after. She reached across and put her hand over mine. Do you want me here Tuesday, she asked. I shook my head. Better not, I said. But thank you. She squeezed my hand once and nodded. The next day I prepared. I gathered every paper, the revocation stamp, the printouts from the bank, the insurance certificate request with Bianca's email, the letter from Lumina, my deed copy, my husband's note. I placed them in a folder of my own, plain brown, no tabs. I called Anna and told her the bank would visit Tuesday, asked if she could come by at 9. She hesitated, then agreed. It is unusual, she said, but better for them to see you have counsel. I called Mikkel and asked if he had received any alerts. Yes, he said, this morning at 8 there was an attempted login on your account from an IP in the hospital network, blocked by the revocation. I thanked him. Could you print that log, I asked. He said yes. Then I called Suso at the elevator company. The clip is ready, he said. You can pick it up this afternoon. Bring an ID. I went, signed, and received a USB in a small envelope. On it, according to Suso, was Sunday night's footage of Daniel and Bianca in the elevator, arguing, Bianca holding the blue folder, Daniel trying to take it, pages spilling, Bianca saying clearly, we'll get her to sign, don't panic. I did not watch it yet. I placed it in my folder. Tuesday morning came gray. I wore my gray coat, my husband's ring, my glasses polished. Anna arrived at 9, firm, carrying her seal. Mikkel came at 9:15 with the printout of the blocked login. We sat at the table. At 10 sharp, the doorbell rang. The man at the door wore a bank badge, carried a clipboard, and spoke politely. Senora Alvarez, I am here for the collateral inspection. I invited him in, offered him a seat. Anna introduced herself as my notary, Mikkel as independent accountant. The man looked surprised, shifted in his shoes. This is unusual, he said. Usually family is present. I smiled once. Family has already signed enough, I said. I placed my folder on the table, opened it, laid out the papers in a row. Here is the revocation of power of attorney stamped. Here is the record of a blocked login from the hospital network. Here is the printout of the credit disbursements to Alvarez and Company. Here is the insurance certificate request from my daughter-in-law's email. Here is the notice letter you sent. Here is my property deed. Here is a clip from the building elevator camera on Sunday, showing my son and his wife with the blue folder of documents they attempted to present to me. And here, finally, is a note from my husband written before his death, stating that if ever my property was used without my consent, I should immediately request full disclosure and file a report with the fiscal authorities. I slid the note forward, which I will do today if necessary. The man shifted again, cleared his throat. We were not informed of these circumstances, he said. This changes the profile. He looked at Anna. She nodded. The law is clear, she said. Revocation prior to disbursement means the bank accepted documents without current authority, and with evidence of attempted coercion, any proceeding would expose you. The man took notes quickly, his pen pressing hard. I will escalate this, he said. I cannot comment further. He stood, thanked us, and left. I closed the door, exhaled, and felt my knees for the first time that morning. That afternoon Daniel called, voice tight. Mama, what did you do? The bank called me. They froze the line. They're investigating. This could ruin me. I listened. You chose your collateral, I said. Now you will choose your consequences. He tried again, softer. I didn't want it like this, Ma. I just needed time. I stayed quiet. Silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it is the only sentence strong enough to carry what words cannot. He finally hung up. That night, Bianca sent me one message. You will regret this. I did not reply. I turned off the light and lay in bed, folder beside me on the nightstand, breathing steadily. Tomorrow, I knew, the first public crack would show. The first public crack came on Thursday evening at the community hall where our building association held its quarterly meeting. Usually those meetings are full of talk about cracked tiles, noisy neighbors, and which color to paint the lobby, but this time the air already carried something heavier. People had heard fragments, that the bank had visited me, that Bianca had been requesting documents for my apartment, that Daniel's company had problems with payments. In a building like ours, secrets don't stay folded very long. They slip under doors and into stairwells until everyone carries at least a corner of them. I arrived early with my folder in a cloth bag, Anna beside me, because she insisted on attending, saying it was good for a notary to be present when whispers turned into statements. Mikkel was already at the front with his laptop, laying out spreadsheets for the usual agenda. Chima hovered near the door, sweeping slowly but watching everyone who came in. By 7 the hall was full, neighbors sitting in rows of metal chairs, the buzz of conversations rising and falling. Bianca and Daniel arrived together, Bianca in her hospital blazer again, Daniel looking drawn, his jaw set too tight. She took a seat near the front where everyone could see her, crossing her legs, her bag placed neatly on the floor beside her, while Daniel lingered a moment before sitting. Rocio whispered to the woman next to her and looked at me with eyes that asked if today would be the day. I nodded slightly, not a promise, only a sign that something would be said. The meeting began with the usual list: roof maintenance, parking disputes, the courtyard repainting. Then Mikkel cleared his throat and said he needed to address an unusual matter before closing. There have been concerns raised about the integrity of our insurance documentation, he said, specifically regarding a certificate request for one of our units that may have been submitted under questionable authority. Since this could affect the association's standing with the insurer, we must clarify it. He looked at me. Senora Alvarez, would you like to speak? I stood, folder in hand, and walked to the front. The room quieted, chairs scraping as people shifted to face me. My heart beat hard, but my voice came steady. Many of you know me, I said. You've seen me for years carrying groceries, paying dues, voting on the courtyard. Recently, documents were prepared asking me to transfer my apartment out of my name under the excuse of care. These documents were pushed on me without full disclosure, and at the same time, my apartment was used as collateral for a loan I did not authorize. I held up the bank letter. Here is the notice of arrears the bank sent. Here are the revocation papers I filed weeks earlier. Here is the insurance certificate request sent from my daughter-in-law's work email to the bank. And here, on this device, is the camera footage from our own elevator showing them carrying my folder of documents while arguing about how to get me to sign. Gasps moved through the hall. Someone muttered a curse. Bianca straightened in her chair, her lips tight. This is a distortion, she said loudly. These are private family matters, and dragging them into a community meeting is unfair and humiliating. I turned to her. It became community business the moment you used the building's insurance records and the moment the bank came to inspect my apartment as collateral. Transparency protects all of us. I handed the USB to Mikkel, who connected it to the projector. The footage played, Bianca and Daniel in the elevator, the blue folder spilling, her voice clear. We'll get her to sign, don't panic. The room went silent except for the hum of the projector. Rocio's voice broke the silence. You told me last week you were organizing a workshop for women like us, she said, but all the while you were trying to strip your own mother-in-law of her name on her home. That's not care, that's strategy. Others murmured agreement. An older man stood and said he'd seen Bianca at the bank cafe with the representative days before the certificate request. Bianca's face flushed, but she kept her composure. You don't understand financial matters, she said coldly. Sometimes difficult decisions are necessary for the greater good of a family. Anna rose then, her voice calm but sharp. There is nothing difficult about the law here. The revocation was filed. Any loan made after that using her property is irregular. Any pressure to sign new transfers under the guise of health or organization is coercion. And presenting such papers at community gatherings as harmless is an insult to everyone's intelligence. Daniel finally spoke, his voice rough. I didn't want it to go this far, Ma. I just needed time. I thought it was manageable. His shoulders sagged as if the room itself weighed on him. I should have told you, I know. Bianca turned on him sharply. Don't admit fault, she hissed, but the microphone picked it up. The neighbors reacted strongly. One woman shouted that if it could happen to me, it could happen to any of them, that children could use their parents' homes without consent, and that we needed stricter association rules to protect everyone. Another said she wouldn't trust Bianca to handle a first aid kit, let alone someone's estate. The tide had turned, and Bianca's usual calm performance cracked under the weight of so many eyes judging at once. I waited until the noise settled, then laid down the final page from my folder, my husband's note, read aloud by Anna. His clear, steady handwriting had written, if ever your property is used without consent, request disclosure, collect proof, and make it public. Dignity is stronger when witnessed. The room fell quiet. Even those who had doubted looked away, because they knew this was not theater. This was my husband's voice carried forward. The chair of the association, normally a timid man, spoke firmly. Given the evidence presented, I propose we record in our minutes that Unit 5B's owner has confirmed her sole authority and that any external requests made without her signature are invalid. Further, we recommend that the association advise all residents to review their deeds and authorizations carefully. All in favor. Hands went up, nearly unanimous. Bianca sat frozen, her smile gone. As the meeting closed, Chima approached me at the doorway, cap in hand. You did right, Senora, he said quietly. Walls remember, but today people remembered too. Mikkel slipped me a folded paper, the bank's official acknowledgement of my revocation, time-stamped, which he had requested earlier that day on my behalf. Keep this close, he said. It's the shield. Bianca gathered her things, her movements sharp. She did not look at me. Daniel came near, eyes wet, voice low. I'm sorry, Ma, I should have stopped this sooner. I couldn't control it. He glanced toward Bianca, who was already striding to the exit. But it's too late now. And then, just before the hall emptied, the bank representative who had inspected my apartment stepped in, unexpected. He had been invited by Mikkel to observe, and he spoke briefly. Given the irregularities, the credit line is frozen and under review, he said. Any enforcement is suspended until we complete investigation. That is official. The room murmured again, but this time it was relief. Bianca stopped in her tracks, turned to him with fury in her eyes. "You had no right to," she began, but he cut her off. "Madam, the documents show you acted beyond authority." "That is my right." He left without waiting for her reply. The hall emptied slowly, neighbors lingering to touch my arm, to nod, to whisper support. Some offered small smiles, some looked ashamed for having believed Bianca's version earlier. Rosa squeezed my shoulder. Anna carried the folder back into my bag, pressed it into my arms. "It's not finished," she said softly, "but today you changed the ground." I walked home under the night lamps, tired but steady. At my door, there was another envelope waiting. This time no bank logo, only my name written in Daniel's hand. Inside, a single sheet. "She won't stop. She's planning something for the hospital event next week. Be ready." I folded the paper and set it next to the folder on my table, the weight of both telling me the next confrontation would not be in my building, but in a room with microphones and strangers, where Bianca thought her authority was strongest. The hospital auditorium had the comfort of fluorescent light and stackable chairs, a screen on the stage, a lectern with a small sign bearing the logo of the private hospital and the name of the event in neutral words. People gathered slowly, employees from different departments in their badges, a few representatives from local senior centers, some neighbors attracted by the promise of free legal advice, and the bank's community team at a table near the entrance with brochures about digital access and family financial wellness. I arrived early with Anna and Mikkel, each carrying a small bag that looked ordinary, because it was better to look like attendees than like opponents. Chima sat 2 rows back with a folded jacket on his lap, as if he had slipped out for a cigarette and wandered into a seminar by mistake. Rocio came too, with a notebook and a pen from the lottery shop, her grandson leading her to a seat with care that she allowed because he is the kind of young man who sees stairs as potential trouble for someone who replaces joints one by one at the public clinic. I chose a seat near the aisle because I intended to stand when it mattered. Bianca was on stage before the start, speaking to the sound technician and the program coordinator. She glanced at the room like a manager inspecting a shop, confidence in every movement. On the wall to the right of the stage, a poster showed her name as moderator and speaker, followed by the name of the bank's legal advisor, the lawyer from a firm that handles property seizures, and a social worker from the hospital who looked kind on her staff photo. The sponsor banner hung beside the screen with the bank's logo. I felt that familiar knot low in my stomach, not fear, only the recognition that words would be pushed through narrow passages, and it would be my job to keep them from strangling the truth. The program started with polite introductions. Bianca welcomed everyone, spoke about the importance of organizing family finances, about reducing friction, about establishing trust through clear frameworks. Her voice flowed as it always does when she is speaking to a room rather than to a person. She introduced the bank advisor, who explained their products with careful phrasing that emphasized safety and ease. The lawyer followed with slides about legal tools, powers of attorney, gift agreements for property where the older person keeps the right to live there, health directives, digital consents. He presented them as ordinary tools that good families use, and I could see heads nodding because this kind of presentation invites agreement by soothing the edges of the actual transfer of control. The social worker spoke last about caregiver burnout and the need to share responsibilities. She mentioned signs of elder abuse, but quickly moved past them to avoid making the room uncomfortable. Bianca returned to the lectern and opened the floor for questions. A woman from a senior center asked about the difference between a full power of attorney and a limited one. Bianca deferred to the lawyer, who spoke about flexibility. A man asked whether a bank could require a home inspection before approving a line of credit. The bank advisor said yes, sometimes, and that families can smooth the process by preparing documents in advance. Bianca nodded at him as if they were on the same team. Another question came about how to talk to older relatives who resist things like digital access. Bianca took that one, smiling, saying it helps to frame it as making life easier and avoiding mistakes, and that sometimes it is necessary to insist for their own good. She said the words "their own good" like a nurse reaching for a syringe. That is when I stood. "My name is Nora," I said, and the microphone the assistant brought me felt heavy in my hand, but my voice came out with the steadiness of someone who has spent most of her adulthood reading utility bills aloud. "I'm a widow. I've lived in my apartment for more than 30 years, and I worked most of my life processing documents for other people. Over the past year, my apartment was used as collateral for a line of credit without my informed consent. At the same time, I was presented with gift agreements that would have transferred ownership of my home under the argument that it would make things easier for my son and his wife. When I revoked an old power of attorney and requested transparency, I was told I was overreacting and that the bank would mark me as uncooperative. The bank sent an inspector to my home on Tuesday, and I received a notice of arrears. I am here because this event is presented as learning, and I want to add something to the lesson. There are rules. They are simple to state and often ignored in practice. Nobody should sign a power of attorney without limits and alerts. Nobody should hand over digital access to email, bank apps, and health portals to anyone without setting notifications to their own phone and to an independent third party. Gift agreements for bare ownership are not harmless. They can be used to box you out from decisions, especially when paired with bank products sold through family members' workplaces. And when a relative helps you, ask yourself if they benefit from that help in ways they do not say out loud. Murmurs rose as people shifted in their chairs. Bianca's face was still, her eyes on me. She measured the room and tried to regain control. "Thank you, Nora," she said, the name flattening in her mouth. "These are important feelings, and your case would benefit from a private consultation, because details matter. In general, however, these tools protect families. To suggest otherwise is irresponsible." I smiled once, not to be kind, but to acknowledge that she had done exactly what I expected. "Details do matter," I said, "so let's talk detail." I lifted my hand and pointed toward the bank table. On the day my line of credit was opened, an employee honorarium was paid by the bank to a program coordinator at this hospital for facilitation and outreach. The amount is small in absolute terms, but large enough to make someone believe they were doing a good job when they convinced older people to sign documents. I requested bank records through the notary and obtained a transaction log from my building's association because the certificate request trail touched our email. On that same day, an invoice was sent from a private email account connected to the program to the bank's generic intake address with a reference to successful activation of senior family product. I asked the hospital's finance office if such honoraria are permitted. They said they are not, and they asked me if I had the document. "I do." I looked toward the stage. The social worker stared at her hands. The bank advisor shifted his weight and adjusted his badge. The lawyer tilted his head in that way lawyers do when they are considering whether a thing is about to break open. Bianca's grip on the lectern tightened. "This is slander," she said. "I have never received any personal payment from the bank." She pronounced the sentence cleanly. I nodded because I knew what came next. "There are more forms of payment than direct transfers," I said. "For example, an honorarium coded to a department budget line that then reimburses an employee for expenses. For example, a points program that awards vouchers for family engagement milestones. For example, referral commission paid to a spouse's professional association account." I looked at Mikkel and he passed me a paper. On the day my line of credit posted, a reimbursement claim was submitted to the hospital's HR department for outreach hospitality at the cafe across from the bank. The receipt shows a meeting with two names, the bank representative and the program coordinator. The HR assistant flagged it for review because the cafe receipt included a cigar charge and this hospital's policy does not reimburse tobacco. The assistant kept a copy and reached out when this event was announced. "Her name is not important right now. The existence of the receipt is. And there is one more detail." I turned to Chima and he stood, clearly nervous but determined. He looked small in the large room, but his voice carried. "I returned a bank envelope that had fallen from a portfolio in the lobby," he said, "and I later provided a clip from our building's elevator camera to the owner of the unit the bank has in their paperwork. In that clip, you can hear the coordinator say, 'We'll get her to sign, don't panic.' The maintenance company released it because of a safety request." A copy is with the notary. Bianca tried to cut in, but the bank advisor held out his palm as if asking for a moment to think. He spoke carefully. If an employee or contractor of the bank engaged in an arrangement that violates policy, we will investigate. If a hospital employee facilitated products in exchange for anything beyond permitted educational support, that is a matter for the hospital. As for this woman's credit line, based on documentation I have now seen from her notary, it appears the authorization was revoked before the disbursements, which is being addressed. He looked at Bianca with a mix of caution and calculation. This event is intended to build trust, not damage it. I apologize to attendees for the discomfort. I recommend that any personal cases be handled privately. Anna stood. We attempted private handling, she said. We were told to be reasonable and to sign gift agreements quickly. We were told the bank would mark the client as uncooperative. We were told the program would protect the family. None of that was true. The law protects specific rights. When a relative acts as a gatekeeper using their workplace to pressure an older person into signing, that is an abuse of access. When a bank processes a line of credit without verifying current authorization, that is a failure of control. And when a hospital program promotes documents without disclosing potential benefits to staff, that is a conflict of interest. There is a complaint ready for the fiscal authorities with supporting documentation. We will file it tomorrow if necessary. The room was tense, but tension had moved away from me and toward the stage. Bianca glanced at the program coordinator, a young man who until that moment had been invisible to me and now looked like he wanted to slip under the table. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it. Daniel stood from his seat in the middle rows, hands in his pockets, shoulders forward. He faced the room, not the stage. I am her son, he said. I took the line of credit. I used my mother's apartment as collateral because I believed I could fix a cash flow problem quickly and quietly. I did not tell her. I relied on documents that should have been canceled. I let my wife push when I should have stopped. He hesitated longer than you should in a room like that, but he held the silence and then continued. I will repay the full amount and fees within 60 days. I will submit a written statement to the bank and to the hospital stating that my mother did not consent. I will step back from any access to her accounts. He turned to me. Ma, I am ashamed of what I did to your name. I don't ask you to forgive me because words are easy. I will act and you can judge me later. Someone in the back clapped once, uncertain. Rocio clapped two, sharper, and then a few others joined. Not an ovation, just acknowledgement that a person had put their neck under the right weight. Bianca's face went rigid, and she reached for Daniel's arm, but he stepped slightly away. Don't do this, she whispered into the microphone by mistake, and the room heard it. The program coordinator rose to calm things, said they would pause for 10 minutes, asked people to help themselves to water. And the buzz of conversation filled the space as people stood and turned to one another with that look that says they had not expected to be handed something real when they came for a brochure. During the break, a woman approached me, hair pulled back tight, badge identifying her as HR from the hospital. I'm the one who flagged the cafe receipt, she said quietly. I have the email exchange with the program coordinator asking me to push it through anyway, and a forwarded message from the bank representative about stacking wins this quarter. If you need it, I will sign a statement. I thanked her and told her that if the hospital chose to address it internally, I would respect their process, but that her statement might be necessary if people tried to pretend nothing had happened. She nodded and slipped me her card, eyes serious. The social worker from the stage came down and touched my arm lightly. I am sorry, she said. We talk about protecting elders, but we do not say enough about protecting them from family wrapped in professional language. I asked her if she would speak to that on stage. She hesitated, then said she would. When the break ended, the program coordinator announced a change. The social worker would address boundaries and conflict of interest, and then they would open only to written questions. Bianca stood stiffly beside the lectern, hands at her sides, no longer the master of the room. The social worker spoke clearly, without jargon. Care is not a blanket permission, she said. Care is a contract with limits and constant checks. If you work in a place that gives you access to vulnerable people, including relatives, You must keep a wall between your job and your family's gains. If you cannot, you must step back. If you see a colleague blurring that line, you must act, because silence makes you an accessory. She did not look at Bianca, and that made it worse for Bianca than if the social worker had pointed. At the end, Bianca tried to close with the usual thanks and reminders about feedback forms, but the room was already getting up, people busy with their own thoughts, and the bank advisor left quickly after glancing at his phone. The hospital HR woman moved to the coordinator and asked for a word in private. Anna and Mikkel gathered our things without a word. I did not look at Bianca as we left, and she did not attempt to speak to me. Daniel waited by the door. He took a breath. "Come on, Ma, I'll walk you to the taxi." I let him, because walking together in silence was worth more than another argument. The next days moved in steps that had weight and shape. The bank formally suspended the credit line and opened an investigation into how the authorization had been accepted. They reversed fees and placed a protective note on my profile requiring my in-person consent for any new product tied to my property. I received a written apology that avoided admitting fault, but stated clearly that procedures had failed. Anna filed a complaint with the fiscal authorities regarding potential fraud and undue pressure, attaching copies of the elevator clip, the certificate request, the blocked login, the bank notices, and the hospital reimbursement note that the HR woman provided after checking with her director. The hospital opened an internal inquiry into the program. Bianca was placed on leave pending the outcome, her access to internal systems locked. A notice went out to staff reminding them of policies against receiving any personal benefit from vendor partnerships, and the program's public pages were edited to remove the contact email that had been used to route non-official communications. The lawyer who had presented at the event sent a letter to Anna emphasizing that he had spoken in general terms and was not advising Bianca or the bank, a movement that told me he had understood how thin the ice had been under his feet. The association published a small note in its newsletter about protecting owner rights and recommended that residents activate registry alerts for their deeds. Chima hung the note on the lobby corkboard and watched people read it with the kind of satisfaction he normally reserves for the day after the facade is washed. In our family, the days had their own rhythm. Daniel came by with papers in his hand and without Bianca, and he sat at my table like a person doing homework they should have done years earlier. He brought a plan with a repayment schedule that did not depend on my cooperation. He had arranged a short-term loan using his company receivables as collateral at a higher interest rate that would hurt him but not involve my apartment. He was selling the car that had cost too much, breaking a lease on office space, and moving his team to a shared workspace that smelled of coffee and new chairs. He showed me the email to the bank where he took responsibility for the credit line and acknowledged the revocation timing. He showed me the letter to the hospital HR department where he stated that his wife had acted as part of her work program while dealing with his family's matters, and that he considered it a conflict even if technically allowed, and that he would not support any claim she made that it was necessary. He did not cry. He did not ask for forgiveness. He asked for the contact at the senior center to offer a session about architect services for accessibility renovations at cost, as a way to offer something useful and clean, not a transaction covered in words about care. I gave him the contact because usefulness is not the same as penance, but sometimes they share a wall. Bianca tried to contact me once by leaving a voice message where she said she regretted how things had unfolded and that she had only ever wanted to ensure stability. I did not respond. She sent Daniel a longer message telling him he had betrayed her publicly and that he would regret choosing appearances over loyalty. He did not play it for me, but I saw how he carried the weight of it anyway, the small line at the corner of his eye that did not leave even when he was making silly faces for Rocio's grandson to get him to laugh during a building cleanup afternoon. She moved out for a while, to a friend's apartment near the river, and the building no longer saw her in our lobby taking charge of everything with a smile and a clipboard. Whether she would return to the marriage was not my decision, and I did not pretend to know. I did not hate her. Hate would give her space in my chest that I wanted to keep for myself. The fiscal complaint moved slowly, as those things do. A prosecutor asked for documents. Anna sent them, Mikkel provided a written explanation of the certificate request. Chima gave a statement about the envelope and the elevator clip. The hospital HR department handed over their emails. The bank sent a generic reply acknowledging receipt. There may be fines later, there may not. I did not tie my piece to an outcome in a file room. I had done the part that was mine. Stop the bleed, show the facts, change the room where the next decision would be made. In the building, people began to bring me their folders, hesitant at first, then with relief. A woman from the 6th floor asked me to sit with her while she called her bank to set transaction alerts. A man on 5 asked me to look over a contract his nephew had put under his nose. I told them what Anna had told me: limit amounts, require countersignatures, set a notifier who is not family, never surrender email portals, never sign gifts fast, write everything down. I explained what a registry alert is and how to get one at the office, and I walked 3 neighbors there in one morning, and the clerk smiled when they saw me again. Mikkel suggested that the association set up a monthly hour where someone would help older residents with paperwork, and I said yes, and he asked me to help, and I did, because I am good at paper. We called it the Tuesday hour, and we set a simple rule: nothing leaves the table without 2 eyes reading it. People came with shoeboxes of envelopes tied with ribbon, with files neatly labeled by people who love color, with crumpled bills and bank letters, and they left straighter than they had arrived. It did not fix everything, but it fixed what a signature could fix. Rosa watched all this quietly. She started taking walks again, small ones around the block, because she said seeing me act without shaking made her want to feel her own legs as more than instruments for getting from chair to kitchen. We fell into a habit of sitting on my balcony in the early evening with tea, and she would read me bits from the local paper and make small jokes about the nitrate scandal at the fish wholesaler, and I would tell her who had stopped by to ask about a clause. Sometimes she would say, "You took back your name," and I would say nothing, because I had not lost my name. I had only let people cover it with stickers for a while. Daniel came every Sunday, not for lunch, only for tea, because he said food made him sleepy and he wanted to keep his head clear. We talked about work, about his new office arrangement, about a small public school he was volunteering to help redesign a corridor to be less narrow for wheelchairs. He learned to bring me his administrative letters to read for tone, not to ask me to solve them, and I learned to listen to his voice and not to the voice he thinks a son should have. We talked about his father sometimes, quietly, not in the way that tries to make sadness grand, just to say a thing that is true, like how he used to leave screws on every windowsill until I started keeping a jar so the apartment would stop sounding like a pocket. Time moved in steps we could live with. One afternoon, weeks after the hospital event, I received a call from the prosecutor's office telling me that the case had reached a settlement without trial. The bank agreed to a compliance review and to pay a fine for procedural failures. The hospital concluded its inquiry and issued disciplinary action. Bianca was demoted and barred from any involvement with vendor programs. She would keep her salary for 3 months while she transitioned to a role without external partnerships. There would be no criminal charges. The program was suspended, and the hospital announced a new oversight committee with someone from the senior center on it. The prosecutor thanked me for the thoroughness of the documentation and said that without the elevator clip and the email trail, it might have been impossible to show pressure. I hung up and sat quietly for a minute. The kettle whistled. I let it whistle a few seconds longer than usual and then turned it off because it was time for tea and not for ceremony. I called Anna and told her the result, and she said it was a good outcome because it changed the systems that had let this happen. I called Mikkel and thanked him for stepping into a storm he could have avoided, and he said that buildings are only as safe as the people who say no at the right time. I went downstairs and gave Chima a slice of my sponge cake that only rises properly when the day is dry, and I told him the elevator clip had done its job, and he smiled and said he would clean the corners with extra care that week, which is his way of celebrating. I called Rosa and told her, and she said, "So we can put down the folder for a while," and I said, "Yes, we can." As for Bianca, she came once to the lobby while I was collecting mail. She looked smaller than before, her blazer traded for a sweater, her hair pulled back without the usual care. She hesitated 2 steps away from me, then spoke. I lost my position, she said. They moved me to internal scheduling, and I have to report to a woman I used to train. She did not cry. She did not ask to be understood. I never thought of myself as a villain, she added. I thought I was solving adult problems that other people refused to address. I nodded because arguing with the word refuse would be a waste of air. You used my fear of being a burden to build an argument, I said, and you used your job to give it weight. There will be other jobs for you. There is only one home for me. She opened her mouth to say something else, then closed it. She walked away with a pace that was neither fast nor slow, just the pace of someone who would have to sit with herself in a smaller room than before and listen to the sounds her steps made. I did not forgive her in a sudden moment. Forgiveness is not a single stamp you press and then a page changes forever. What I chose was not to carry her around like luggage. If I saw her in the supermarket queue, I nodded, because people are still people even when they have harmed you. If her name came up in the building chat, I did not sharpen it with anger. If Daniel mentioned her, I listened without rushing to conditions. That is how I live with the part of the story that does not resolve into a clear final image. With the extra time that opened when I no longer had to defend my door, I started something small. On Wednesdays, I sit at the senior center with a sign that says, "Documents read aloud," and I read letters to people who find paper tiring. I charge nothing. People bring bank statements, health forms, notices, and I read without adding fear to my voice. I explain how to set up an alert, how to write a revocation, how to file for registry notifications. I have a small stamp that simply says "Read and understood by owner," with space for a date and signature, and I lend it to people so they can mark their copies. The director of the center offered to pay me a small stipend from their program budget, and I only accepted after she insisted twice, because I wanted to keep the work clean, but I also understood that being paid means it is not a favor that can be withdrawn without explanation. The Tuesday hour in our building became a habit. Mikkel keeps a list of matters that return and a stack of forms for registry alerts. He trains a volunteer every month to be a second pair of eyes. We set up a rule that all notices received from banks or utilities must be acknowledged by 2 residents if the owner asks, which reduces panic at midnight because knowing someone else has seen the letter makes sleep possible. Chima keeps an informal watch on who enters with clipboards, and if someone says they are from a bank, he asks for a stamped order and an appointment. The elevator company sent an updated policy for releasing clips, clearer now, with a field that says purpose, safety, theft, harassment, coercion, and I smiled seeing that last word printed on a form. As for me, I did one last thing that may sound odd. I went to the social services office and requested an assessment for support for older adults who live alone. The social worker looked at me puzzled because I seemed capable, but I told her it was precisely because I am capable that I wanted this on record. If one day I needed help, the file would say what I wanted and what I refused. The assessment triggered a notation that requires any future guardian request to include proof that the investigator read my file and visited in person. In a sense, I agreed to be a burden on a system by asking it to write my preferences down. That file is now a lever if someone tries to push something past me in a hurry. I told Daniel the next Sunday what I had done. He nodded, approving, and said he would add a note to his own file stating that he wants any future responsibility to be shared with a third party so that things are never reliant on one person's judgment. We looked at each other and both understood what that sentence carried without saying more. On a late afternoon when the light from the port was flat and the gulls were quiet, I sat at my table and opened the tin with my husband's screws. I held the 4 lines he had written for me one more time, and then I put them away. He had given me an instruction for the kind of day that arrived. I had followed it. He would have liked the Tuesday hour, not because he liked meetings, but because he liked people knowing how to hold a tool properly. I miss his quiet, but I am not living on the edge of that missing anymore. There is one more small scene. At the courthouse cafeteria, where anyone can go if they are prepared to sit on hard chairs, I saw an older man showing a clerk a letter he did not understand. He was embarrassed, his hands moving restlessly. I asked if I could read it to him. He hesitated, then handed it to me. It was a standard notice about a fee. I explained it slowly. He looked at me and exhaled. I thought it was something worse, he said. I haven't been sleeping. I told him to sleep that night and to come to the Tuesday hour if he wanted. He smiled, a small smile, and I watched him walk out with his shoulders easier. Changing an entire system is difficult. Changing one person's night is available to us more often than we assume. The apartment is still mine, not as a trophy, but as a place where I know the sound each hinge makes. The registry alerts vibrate on my phone sometimes when the bank system sends test pings, and I check them, and then set the phone down. The bread drawer contains bread again. The blue folder is now my own, with tabs that I placed, not the pastel ones that kept me looking where someone else wanted. In the building chat, people still argue about paint colors and noise, because normal conflicts also deserve space, and that is a sign that we have room for the ordinary again. If you came into my kitchen now and sat across from me, I would not tell you that I became stronger because of this, because that sounds like a prize you get for surviving something that you did not need to go through. I would tell you that other people's schedules and titles are not your calendar and not your name. I would tell you that being watched by a room can protect you when it should, and that a concierge with a cap, an accountant with patient eyes, a notary with a stamp, a sister with oranges, and a son who learns late but learns still can rearrange a story that was going to end in a very different way. I leave you with a picture that is not grand. It is the Tuesday hour at the association office. Mikkel is explaining a clause to a man who pretends he is not confused and then lets his shoulders drop when he understands. Chima is putting a new battery in a remote that someone brings in because it is too small for their fingers to pry open. Rosa is sitting next to Rocio, comparing medicine schedules without judgment. I am stamping a copy for a woman who smiles when she sees the words "read and understood by owner" on the bottom of her paper. The door opens and closes. People look up and then down again. There is no applause and no speeches. There are only documents and faces that do not look lost. And on the corkboard by the door, a small note that says, in thin pen, "Bring your own pen if you can. If not, ask Nora."